All right, we are live here today with Sean Humphreys. I'm Vaughn Zawadzki. This is our last podcast before the federal election. So we're going to have a little bit of fun roasting the candidates, talking about policy, making our predictions on where the housing market is going to go and where the interest rates are going to go. We are mortgage people. All right. Well, our last one, we did a live rate reaction to the Bank of Canada holding the overnight rate. It didn't come as a huge surprise. I had predicted a cut just so it'd be a little bit different. But also, because I'm not looking at it from the same way the Bank of Canada is looking at it. I'm looking at it long term. I think that the economy is not going to be strong for a little bit now. Have you given any more thought to the Bank of Canada's rate hold last week, or anything else that we didn't get covered?
Yeah, I think on no regrets at this point. I think I was calling for no rate cut, and I still think that was the right choice at this point. I think that with the US tariff talk and the trade war kind of simmering right now, I think that there was less of a burning platform where they needed to make a rate cut and they needed to kind of make it cheaper for Canadians to borrow money. If we look at that, so I think we might look back and say, oh, they should have cut 50 basis points, or at this time they should have cut more. But I think they had done it enough up until that point. They had cut was it 2% or 2.25% by this point. So let's pause a little bit. Let's let some of those previous rate cuts work their way through the system, and let's leave some of the powder dry for some more emergency rate cuts if we need them, because the US is doing something.
And watching the inflation stuff bounce up and down, they had a GST holiday. Well, that's inflationary. Then they removed the carbon tax. Well, that eases it. And you're like, well, there's too many levers being pulled for a very long time. Taking a little bit of a, let's stop and catch our breath here for a second.
Sure.
We look at it from a housing market perspective, and we understand that you're probably going to need more rate cuts to spur on the GTA market, which is what we're cheering for, so we can spend most of our time, underwriting mortgage files, and less time thinking about what the Bank of Canada is doing. But that's not their primary concern. They're not. Nobody wants another housing market boom at the moment with all this other instability there. So,
well, maybe we do as mortgage brokers. Like we would love that, but I don't think that they necessarily want to be pushing inflation up very high. And the market is cooled across Canada at this point. The housing is not something that people are making big investments into. As businesses are not making big investments, they don't know what their cost of goods are going to be going forward. What is there going to be the cost of exporting? What is there going to be? What's the the political landscape going to be like? And so I think we're seeing in business is kind of the headline news, and then people are also pulling in their personal finances as well.
For sure. And there is a lot, there are a lot of questions about where things are going to shake out with the tariffs. It seems like it's starting to ease. I think that we're maybe seeing a little bit of common sense or sense of any kind return to, the United States, because the housing market, not just in Canada, has been slow. It's ice cold in the United States as well. And nobody's doing anything. And so I think that, having our next government solidified will help with that. I mean, I said this about the U.S. government, and boy, was I wrong about that. the change in the U.S. government did not bring around any stability or certainty. But, it seems like, Trump is announcing he's going to scale back the tariff stuff with China and the tariff stuff with the world. I think he played it as hard as he could, and we all knew it was a bad move. He did it anyway. I think that after consecutive months of the stock market eating shit, basically, I think he's like, okay, I was supposed to be the conservative right wing president
Right.
that everybody made money, and now everybody's broke. So,
Well, and he came out yesterday and kind of said something the opposite of what he was pushing before, which was that he has no intentions of firing Jerome Powell, who's the Federal Reserve chief. And because when he had made kind of disparaging comments about him, I can't wait for him to be gone. I can't wait for, I can't wait for this guy to be out of here. That really put the market on edge, because a Federal Reserve, the largest currency setter in the world, when they're saying that, well, this is maybe not as dependable, that causes markets to retract and for people not to trust in U.S. currencies, which then pushes money elsewhere, devalues the economy essentially in the U.S. That's not great, and so he stepped back from that, which is a smart move. And so it kind of seems that, well, maybe he is capable of holding more than one thought in his brain at once,
or a better thought, because it was absolutely ridiculous and I'm not an economist. I'm not, don't claim to be, but when he's creating policy around tariffs that are going to drive inflation up, and then screaming at the Federal Reserve for not cutting interest rates. It's almost like he doesn't even understand the basic fundamental, how the seesaw works.
right?
So
his supporters are still behind him. Like there's his base, the MAGA base, is still behind him. He has. I know you see probably headlines of or like stories of, I wish I didn't vote for Trump because this has happened. I'm sure there's a lot of farmers that feel differently now, but his base is willing to go through this pain and let him cook, let him do his thing, because that's going to be good for the long-term health of the economy, which, doesn't seem like that's the case, but his supporters are still on board.
Yeah, I could see and believe a scenario where millions of Americans are wrong. It doesn't seem that far-fetched to me. So if they
Right.
want to keep believing in this terrible policy, this is not a move that can be made. It's just a different world that he's living in, one that existed, I don't know, 60, 80 years ago, long before I was born. And I just don't see how you're going to, with all the pathways that we've created for free trade, all the manufacturing that we've moved away to get cheaper goods coming back the other way, I don't see how charging a tax is going to reverse that, so that we can be in the manufacturing glory days again.
Yeah. People don't want those jobs. People want them, but they want America to be good at manufacturing, but nobody really wants to work in manufacturing anymore in the US. And
yeah, I'm sure people would take it if the pay was there, but the pay won't be there. The economics of it, just the fundamentals of it, just simply do not work. They will not work.
I've worked in manufacturing. I've worked in factories. It's the reason I stayed in school. Like, I found it extremely mind numbing, and I'm sure there's lots of very fulfilling manufacturing jobs that are out there. But in terms of like me personally wanting to go and do that job, I found it to be very, very difficult in terms of like just melting my brain. So I didn't love it.
Yeah, well, especially, I mean, if you could do it, if you could be in manufacturing and support a single income family on it, have kids go off to college, all that stuff, there would be a lot on the other side of the actual work itself that would be rewarding enough that you would say, hey, I've got a good life out of this. But that got chipped away, I think, for the most part. And you're like, we have to struggle so hard. And so respect everybody that's in manufacturing, and
well, and I never worked in a car plant. I never worked auto. I worked in like a paper printing, like a printer, essentially. Like we
yeah,
made
that would
like
smell nice in there.
magazines, and so it was just basically like stacking piles of paper together, and there was some interesting components of it. There was kind of a smaller boutique thing that was pretty cool that I worked in, but then just being on the main line was moving. Like, this is a robot job. Like, this is not something that is very fulfilling, but there are plenty of well-paying jobs in auto manufacturing that people can do what you said, where they can put their kids through school, they can work there, they can make a living at it. And I think those are the types of jobs that Canadians value and Canadians want to work in, because they're well-paying and they're unionized. But there has been this union jobs are, unions are bad. But the thing is, unions are necessary if you want to have a strong manufacturing group, because they need to be behind the well-paying jobs, the benefits, getting people, continuing to make those wages. Because if that's not happening, they will just pay the lowest possible amount of money, or corporations will pay the lowest amount of money. And then there's jobs are not valuable. And then that's where they get shipped overseas to other people who will do them cheaper.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about unions. I've never been particularly pro-union, and I've never been particularly anti-union. I see
Right.
that certainly when you're a fledgling economy, coming out of, let's say, World War II, and you need all this manufacturing, a union's probably good to get your workers some rights. Nobody should have to, work in unsafe conditions and stuff like that. I don't know how relevant in today's economy, and with like our volumes and volumes of labor laws, and more protections for workers. I don't know how relevant it is there, but maybe it is. Maybe just to have a bargaining team to negotiate good benefits and stuff that will help Canadians build a better future for themselves.
Well, the reason that Canadians have these benefits, have these, good, protections in place for them, even in jobs that are not unionized, are because of unionized workforces.
Like most of our stat holidays came from it. So, I mean, if you like having a couple of free paid days a year, you get a union to thank for that.
I'm in business for myself, and I work all the time. Like, that's all I do is work. So, if it was just my workforce of me, I'd be working Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays, and holidays, and all those different days. I'm always doing something, and that's what I expect of myself. So if you're going to just push that out, like, I'm going to own a corporation of me doing all those work, I'm not going to provide those.
You should unionize your workforce.
How can I unionize myself?
SH union, yeah. I'm taking Sundays off so I can go to church, be responsible.
You asked me, just switch gears here. You asked me at the start if I had any kind of, forget the word you used, but any insights that came after the fact. And we had, so we had talked about, okay, is this the right move for them to cut rates or leave rates flat? And then you mentioned like, oh, well, the carbon tax came off. I think we were getting a rebate for that, but I'm kind of taking a long way around to say this, but if you think about people are saving money because gas prices are lower now, you're immediately seeing that in your pocket, versus cutting interest rates at that same time kind of feels like a double dip at that point, where you're seeing a stimulator for the economy with lower fuel prices. To me,
so
like,
they have
you're seeing
to be
both of those things,
because we don't want another inflation push. Specifically, we don't. It'll slow down the housing market. It'll cause trouble. So I could see that. I think we both agree that the rate hold was prudent. And I guess that's a pretty good segue into.
Can I share one more thing? I did have one more.
Take this banner down then. Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Are you all right with that? I've got one more
kind
of rate hold recap, because I had shared this this screen last week, which was the inflation breadth. So this is the share of the inflation components that are increasing over 3%. And I said, well, this is something that the Bank of Canada is looking at. This is going in the wrong direction. We're up over 40%, which is true. It's not going in the right direction. And so I decided to ask an economist about this and like, how much of a concern is this for the Bank of Canada? You know, it's anything over 35% is not good. We're up over 40%. And she said that, so I asked Sherry Cooper, who's the Dominion Lending Center's
Love Sherry.
chief economist, and she kind of brushed it off. She thought that this wasn't important. If we go into a recession, which it seems like we are, and I saw Oxford came out and said that we're probably going to go into a deeper recession, this retracts pretty quickly. And so it shouldn't be something that the Bank of Canada is trying to get ahead of, because we've got more components of our that Canadians are buying are increasing by 3%. Because if we go into a recession, this will reverse course pretty quickly. And it's not something that the Bank of Canada would need to worry about raising interest rates in order to get inflation back under control.
That's interesting, because when we were at that conference last year, we were listening to Benjamin Tall. He was pretty staunch about the idea that the Bank of Canada has one job, and that one job is to be an inflation fighter. So two different positions, but I mean, I understand what she's saying about, you know, if we're heading towards a recession, inflation is no longer a threat.
Well, and so our headline inflation is at 2.3%, and that went down. And for some of the reasons we talked about, you know, the GST holiday and all those things were kind of pushing inflation lower than what we expected. But if you look into the underlying numbers, the breadth of things going up more than 3% is bad, you know, to use an economic term. And so
economically shitty.
Yeah. So, but if we were going to have a recession, when it looks like all signs are pointing towards that, no need to raise rates because of that basket of goods maybe increasing over the target at this point. Like, and so everything else is pointing red lights, and we're going towards recession. No need to worry about this one, like, hey, this is bad. This is going the opposite direction. That just seems like that's going to take care of itself if we're going into a recession, and we'll need to decrease rates more. And what Sherry Cooper is saying is another 50 to 75 basis points by the end of 2025.
I was chatting about this exact thing with a friend of mine last night who had a mortgage coming up for renewal, and we were sort of going over like, what is the economic prediction? And his take was like, well, it seems like we could either be heading towards a recession but still have inflation and high interest rates, or the better of the two options, heading towards a recession and have some interest rate relief. It's like, it doesn't seem like there's a super pretty picture to paint here. It doesn't matter who our government is.
No,
you know, there's going to be no immediate turnaround from this. But it is a good segue in terms of, you know, we're talking about these levers that they're pulling. Part of it is pandemic related. Obviously, we have had to deal with that, throwing money around and helping families with some relief from that. And, you know, but then we had the carbon tax, we had that pulled back, we had the GST holiday, all this stuff. I do think it's important that we have that whatever our next government is, stop cranking so many levers and let things sort of develop. You know, like we were having a chat about the hockey game going on. I said, I don't want to see the referees. It's like, and I think that's what it's the same philosophy about the government. I don't want to see the government being involved in every good or bad thing that happens in our economy or in our country. Let's let the government quietly do their job. You know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very conservative platform approach, right? Like, cut the bureaucracy. I guess
get out of the way.
Yeah, get out of the way. let the private sector do its thing, cut any sort of climate related pieces that would get in the way of being able to hit those goals. And that's going to be
specifically, he goes after the climate stuff.
Well, I mean, it's a part of their platform,
It is,
right?
yeah.
Like they're saying like that's an impediment to building a strong Canada. And so that's getting in the way of us making Canada great again.
I think that natural resources are an opportunity for Canada to help out with employment, help out with the economy. And so stepping out of the way of these ridiculous stuff like spending billions on buying a pipeline and then shutting it down. Like we just did, it's too many actions lead to too many mistakes, I think. And quietly, the government can do things like reduce some of the red tape that's involved in order to build communities, so that we can get more housing supply, and also maybe choose different environmental platforms instead of what seems like choosing the strictest of environmental platforms, which actually restricts the Canadian economy and hurts our labor. And
well, I know we're going to talk more about the housing. I assume we'll talk more about the housing platform, but we seem to be edging into the climate first, which is funny. But with part of the Conservatives' platform is to cut programs around EVs and cut any sort of, that's a part of their, I don't know the details of it, but cutting EV programs, cutting environmental programs that is this expenditure for the government in order to be able to get people to just drive more electric cars and leave it. And now you can make an argument, well, that's going to help because we don't care, let people buy what they want, which I'm sure in certain parts of Canada is exactly what they want. They don't want to pay for government incentive for people to buy electric cars. Just let them do that. And I guess that's kind of similar to the carbon tax, where like people, you're in a personal emitter of, it doesn't matter about what you're spending, what you're emitting, you shouldn't pay a tax on it, and that will save the government money, I guess. I mean, it's a revenue source that they cut out, and that.
Yeah, it gets weird when you have one government adding tax and another government reducing it, and you have this massive deficit, and who's to blame about that?
Yeah.
But
let's talk about the housing platforms. I did a little bit of research. You told me not to, but I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, the housing platform, it was the biggest thing. Even as let's say November last year, housing was a huge thing.
November this year. Well, why don't I talk about I'll start with the Conservative Party because their platform just got released. So I'll just say their key initiatives here. So their home building goal is to commit to constructing 2.3 million homes over the next 5 years. They want to streamline building process by reducing bureaucratic hurdles, cutting taxes on home building, and freeing up federal land development. And they want to incentivize. I'm dying today. Incentivize municipalities to build the type of construction that they want and repurpose federal properties. And then they've also got that
was a liberal thing to repurpose the federal building.
So yeah, and then one key difference there is that the Conservative Party wants to sell federal lands and the Liberal Party wants to provide 99-year leases on those lands. So rather than selling that asset, they want to lease 99-year lease and then build affordable housing on those lands. From a mortgage broker point of view, that makes me worried because leased land is a pain in the butt to finance. And also the Liberal Party is talking about prefabricated homes. And that's also an issue for financing. So both of those individually are both a pain. Not a lot of lenders do it. So if they do go forward with that, we do have leased land, affordable housing. People need to get mortgages on that. We will need our big banks to step up with new programs, or to, I don't know, maybe it's the federal government allowing some programs around that. We would need some help there because there's currently no programs
CMHC
available.
initiative that doesn't go anywhere. You know,
pardon me,
or another CMHC initiative that doesn't go anywhere, that cost a couple $1 million to put in place, and nobody uses the program. I heard Ron Butler take a rip into Chrystia Freeland. I took a rip into her on this show as well, about these wasting time and money on policies that cannot even get off the ground.
Yeah, that one was.
So like seeing an end to that,
yeah. Well, I wanted to say,
looking forward to. It's like no more ridiculous policy, all these mortgage changes, and I mean, it's difficult to evaluate some of them. Some of the first-time home buyer stuff and moving the cap on the insured mortgage. Okay, we haven't really seen.
Smart.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen it happen, or like what are the results of that? Because the housing market in general has just been, at a standstill since we started this podcast. Maybe that's why we started this podcast, was the spare time while the housing market in the GTA at least sorts itself out.
Well, I think that they have released, to be fair to the Liberal government and to criticize them, they've had some policies that just seem not well thought out, not asked for, and maybe cost more than the benefit that will get them. But some of the things that they've done, they increased the amortization for 30-year amortization for first-time home buyers. That's a program I'm using every day as a mortgage broker, helping people to use that. The first-time home buyers savings account, people are using that across the board, and being able to move money from RSPs into that. So that helps people who may be oversaved in an RSP pull some money, $8,000 a year. It's a good amount of money, but it's not a lot of money. That specifically is a program that I'm seeing first-time home buyers use all the time. So to me, those two things, increasing the insured cap up to 1.5 million, to me, those are three winners that just seem like, well, of course they did that. Of course they increased that. I mean, those are things that are helping people buy, first-time home buyers buy properties, which is ideally what we want. We hear all the time, sorry to run on here, but we hear about like, oh, first-time home people, young people can't buy. We'll never get into the market. But these are programs without building more supply. These are demand-centric solutions that are helping people to
it helps first-time homebuyers be more competitive. Well, they're not at their sort of earning potential yet. Maybe evens the playing field a little bit there. And something had to be done, specifically with the housing prices, GTA, Greater Vancouver, everything's over $1 million. It helps out in terms of, it doesn't limit your options to condo only or condo townhouse only if you're a first-time buyer. So that's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind some policy every now and then.
Right. Yeah, but everything all at once and throwing the kitchen sink at it, and here I really feel like that era is over.
I think that Trudeau was always that guy. I think he was always going to be that guy. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that even his own party put him up in the beginning, but based on popularity of his name. I mean, when that stuff broke about his Aladdin costume and whatnot, I said, this is probably not the guy you want running your party. Let's forget about running Canada. Probably not the guy you wanted to run your party. But they're like, but his name's very popular, and I think he can win an election. And they weren't wrong about that. But that's the guy that we got. So and this is why I think, like, on a less sophisticated and a more personal note, I think that it's time to say goodbye to the Liberal Party for the next 4 years anyway. Let them go back and clean all that stuff up.
Yeah.
All the scandal,
So
all that. But I
I
do think,
pre-voted. I already did the advanced polling. I voted Liberal, and I think you probably voted Conservative. So I think we've got a good kind of mix here of
and I'm
what.
not a true blue guy by any means. And I think it's super unfortunate. I think the Conservatives, I like the platform this time around. I think it's super unfortunate that they get an unlikable character to put up.
Right.
The exact opposite of the Liberal Party when they put Trudeau up there. Like there was something
Yeah.
likable about him, something familiar about his name, even with the Aladdin stuff aside. But here we have like the Conservative Party has come out and leaned less towards the right as they usually do. We're not hearing anything ridiculous about women's health coming up in this election.
Oh, the social issues,
and even
that'd be crazy.
And even Poilievre, come out and saying like we're not making federal legislation changes to women's health and reproductive health, and that's
right.
That's good because in the last election they were running based on some weird stuff, some far right conservative. But now they've sorted out their party and their platform. But now they're this unlikable leader. So and it could seriously hurt them on Monday next week having that unlikable leader.
So I think they ran the wrong campaign. I know Corey Tenike came out. He was Doug Ford's political advisor, basically ran his campaign this past one when he won. Basically came out and was criticizing the Conservative campaign of like the things that they did, the messages that they stuck by lost them this election. They just got so into their lane of axe the tax and,
anything but Trudeau.
Trudeau, everything's about Trudeau. And that worked for 2 years. And then everything changed. Trudeau's gone. They axed the tax. Trump is now the number one thing. And they just missed the boat. They just completely got off the message. I think if it was a choice between Trudeau and Poilievre, even though I don't agree with all the policies of the Conservatives, I can see why we would have chosen the Conservatives. And maybe I would have, closed my eyes and checked the Conservative box. I think that there are some good things that they're talking about, but there's a lot of things that I just disagree with in their basic platform. And I think and also I just find him to be icky. I think
that will be the biggest thorn in their side right now is that a lot of Canadians, I talked to a lot of Canadians that will vote Conservative in this election and feel the same way. I think he's extremely unlikable. And I think that it's funny that the Liberals have brought in somebody who's not prepared to play identity politics on either side, which is, I think, prudent of a government. I think that we need to move past the era of identity politics, and hopefully when, President Trump moves on from his presidency, the next two candidates in the United States will have moved on from it as well. I do not think that Pierre Poilievre has moved on.
Canadians do not want that. Yeah, Canadians don't want that type of politics. I think the name calling, the nicknames that Poilievre was doing, you're never going to see Mark Carney do that. And I think we mentioned this off air last time in terms of like if Carney was conservative, the conservative leader, I think they'd win in a landslide. I just think that the way he presents himself and the way his experience that he has as the governor of the Bank of Canada, the governor of England, both of those things, I think Conservatives can get behind. I just think,
and the fact that he owns all these businesses, and and Conservatives are taking a shot at that. He has a business in the United States, and I'm like,
that's conservative?
Isn't that conservative, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that that's a right-leaning pro-business tax shelter, legal tax shelters? We're not talking about anything illegal here.
As Trudeau went so far to the left Carney's brought them more back into the middle, which is really what we're looking at for a successful liberal government. I think we also said this last time, like, oh, he's got no, Trudeau's got no experience. He's the drama teacher. Like, we heard that from conservatives for 10 years of, oh, get rid of the drama teacher. Yeah. And now that we've got somebody, the liberal leader, who's experienced and has business acumen and has, it's like, oh, he's corrupt and he's like, there's all these other names.
I think that's ridiculous.
Like, what do you want?
Yeah, I don't think there's a real strong argument to throw him as an individual or as a personality, like a political personality, to throw him under the bus. I think that you'd be a lot smarter to go after liberal policy and liberal reputation, specifically the liberal reputation. Carney's inherited a pretty big mess to clean up, a lot of scandals, some really, really terrible spending. I understand. Look, the finance minister is gone. The previous prime minister is gone. And I think that's going to be enough to make this very competitive election. And originally, I didn't want to go out and vote when it was going to be a conservative landslide. Now I'm afraid that we're not going to get a conservative government at all. So I'll be getting my ass out on Monday.
Yeah, no, you should vote. Everybody should vote. I think this might be the highest turnout we've had in decades. I mean, 7.3 million people used the advanced polls up until which is a record in itself. I think they got 5.8 million through advanced polls last time, and through the first 3 of 4 days we already had 7.3 million people. So we could get 70 or 75% people voting. Hopefully.
I will guess, if I wanted to make a prediction on what either government would do for or like to positively impact housing or negatively impact housing, I would say the proposed budget from the Liberal Party could be inflationary, so that could hurt interest rates, that could hurt the housing economy. I think that we're probably better off with the Conservative Party in that regard. But I mean, it seems like, are we splitting hairs here? Is either government really going to make the housing market better? I don't know. It's like, probably not.
So my take on that is that the debts, both parties are looking to add debt. I think it's 100 billion from the Conservatives and 130 billion from the Liberals. So both of those would increase bond yields, which could over time increase the cost of borrowing, which would increase mortgage rates. So, how much they increase is really, who knows? Yeah. But if we're heading into a recession, we want inflationary action. We want to push costs up. We want our government to be investing in infrastructure, investing in and pushing things up, because historically, in recent history before the pandemic, we were below the target. We're at 2% or below inflation. We want inflation in that instance. We don't want a lot of it, but we want. So I think running the debt is going to be one thing, but invest. So if we're going into a recession, this is another point. Cut me off whenever you're ready. But if we're heading into a recession, businesses will pull back spending. The Conservative platform relies on businesses cutting bureaucracy and having businesses just invest in the economy, and that's what's going to provide our growth. In reality, or in my reality, is that if there is a recession, businesses pull back in their investments. They no longer put money into the economy. And that's where government, and this might be a liberal talking point that I'm reading off of, but that's where government needs to jump in and incentivize businesses to and be partners of businesses, because they're not going to do it by themselves if there's a tariff war, if there's all sorts of other problems with our economy slowing down, uncertainty. Anyway, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought is that, for the conservative approach there would be just to remove some of the red tape, remove some of the costs. So, I mean, if that's incentivizing, I mean, that is incentivizing, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
both governments will incentivize business, so which will contribute to growth. Which government would maybe lean towards doing it more, and incentivize in different areas? Like, I think that really the focus of this next 4 years for Canada has to be on natural resource production. Because
Yeah.
it's there, it's the low hanging fruit. It's like I think we can get out of trouble just by. And I'm not pro pollution, and I'm definitely pro environment. But I question the strategy. Is just a carbon tax? Is this the best strategy? Is this what our best thinkers can put together? One of the points that I really liked from Pierre Poilievre was talking about more of a global emissions, and saying if
Sure.
we can produce propane, natural gas, which is cleaner than coal, and sell that to India or any manufacturing country, it could reduce the carbon emissions by whatever billions of tons. I don't know if this
Sure.
is accurate, and I'm not an
No,
environmentalist specialist, but if it is, then this is a
I
strategy
think
how we can make money.
I think it's a great idea. I think we should be doing that. I see the same thing. The only caveats to be is that it costs environment pollution. So yes, one, will India adopt all of it and get off coal completely? That's a decades long procedure, in my opinion. Also, it costs. There is carbon emitted when you produce the natural gas. It's a high energy output to produce it, and then to ship it
You got to
from
get it there.
Canada. I don't know if
Yeah,
you know, like Canada's not close to India.
not
Like
very.
we got to
No.
ship it by boat over there. So that then also is an emitter as well. So yes, if India had our natural gas and the ability to use it, that would reduce carbon. But there is a whole process to get it over there that is being kind of glossed over.
Sure.
And all of our existing partners outside of the US, they care about pollution. They care about the environment. All of our new partners that are not in the US, they want to see that kind of policy in terms of us being responsible emitters and
And
responsible
I
producers
guess
of natural gas.
overall, what I'm thinking is, if that strategy works, that's the kind of, I'm hoping that that's a more common sense strategy, than trying to tax our way out of a environmental problem. I
Yeah,
never the logic never connected for me. Maybe it's there. I'm not going to claim to be an emission specialist,
sure.
but I'm thinking. I think even Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was governor of California, talked about, like, how can we make money? Like, this should be the conversation in my mind. How can we make money from protecting the environment? And, like,
Mhm.
tax is not a good money making proposition.
Right.
Um,
You
it's not
still
creating
you still
anything.
need to have checks and balances on industrial polluters, industrial producers of those. They will just do it the cheapest possible way to make. They are a slave to corporation, to their
Agreed. And when Donald
shareholders.
Trump did his presidential address and was like, "We're going to remove every barrier there is to manufacturing," I'm like, that's not good. Like,
No,
Michael Moore made a
there's a
movie out
balance
of
to it
Flint,
for sure.
Michigan. Like, you don't take every risk possible just to make a buck. No, you don't.
Yeah.
But how do you make a common sense
To bring it
approach?
back to housing, I don't know if anybody's watching this point, but bring it back to housing in terms of like building houses. I think that's got to be. We always came back to it's a supply problem. We're in a we're in a housing crisis. We've been in housing crises before. After the Second World War, there was not enough places for people to live. I did some research on my family on where they lived right after the war. Like, they were renting a basement apartment with 4 kids, ended up moving to the suburbs to Agincourt at that time, which was like farm fields.
Right.
So, in that time, we came together with housing plans, building housing quickly, but the thing is, like, any housing, in order to be affordable and attractive, needs to be close to transit, needs to be close to other jobs. Like, that's a lot of infrastructure being built. And I think that's where any government that comes into power next, they need to focus on building as much infrastructure, energy corridors, certainly can be pipelines, renewable energy pipelines, east-west. I think that's a great idea, but also just building as much housing as possible. So getting people into the trades, getting people, using our lumber that we have, using our resources we already have. What can we do in order to get that? And that just can't come from the private housing, from private builders by cutting,
No, they have to work hand in
environmental
hand.
factors.
Yeah, they have to work hand in hand, and community planning takes a long time. And so I think that the conservative platform that, incentivizing municipalities, because there are places to build that municipalities don't want more there because they're elite. They're ultra
I
rich
think,
people with
oh,
with super big lots, and they don't necessarily want more housing. They don't want a condo building to block their views, even though their municipality can has room for it. So
sure.
if you have to incentivize those municipalities, then that's probably the easiest way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and building less just single bedroom condos. Like, I don't think people really want to live in those long term. So we need more family housing, build more houses versus more condos. So that might be some urban sprawl a little bit, which we've talked about. But if we can get more transit around these places, build around some of these hubs, and it's not just
Yeah,
one
so then
bedroom
Agent
condos.
Court turns into a farm field, or turns from a farm field into a
Yeah.
great community with access to employment and resources, everything that you need. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think the one thing about Agent Court, if I want to take a stab at it, would be that the transit's not great there. Like, people rely on their cars, and that doesn't really create a good housing plan. I think if we can get people out of their cars and into transit, into some high-speed rail, subways, trains, that's going to help to, I think that's a better overall plan. And that's then just, that's creating more jobs as well.
I mean, those are good points. I would say, build now, ask questions later. Having a great future strategy is definitely important, but I think just getting houses built, I think the rest of it will come in behind it. But that's why I'm not a policymaker.
Yeah,
That's why I'm not
you're not.
building communities. I'm doing mortgages for people. I'm pretty good at that,
Right.
but maybe that's where, as far as it goes. But I think I just don't want to see any kind of developments getting hamstrung by, well, what about
Well,
50 years from now? It's like, well, let's get you water, let's get you sewage,
yeah.
and get you a road.
It should be water,
Let's start
sewage, and
there.
transit, in my opinion. Like, when the Girard streetcar was built, it was built out into the farm fields. Like, there was no housing out there. And that whole line got built. Like, you can see early pictures. There's just trees on either side of the Girard streetcar line. Like, that makes sense. Like, this is where we want to go. These are the roads that we want. This is the sewage. This is the power. This is the water. And you would never just start building houses without sewage and water and electricity. Like, throw in transit with that. It's
Yeah,
easiest to build now when there's nothing there.
that's 100% true. And the way that we move, labor laws and environmental laws and all that stuff, it's never going to get like easier. It's always going to be more expensive in the future. So get at it now.
Yeah.
So you voted. I think I've revealed where I'm going to vote. It's going to be an exciting week, I guess, in
Yeah.
politics and news, and we'll probably won't see any real immediate result because I don't think that we have two parties that are going to do anything drastic at the moment.
Yeah. Well, let's, on our next show next Wednesday when we record, let's take a deeper dive into whichever party wins. And if it's a minority party, let's look at both parties at that point. And we can dive into what we expect their next steps to be and what the outcomes would be for those platforms.
Sounds good to me.
All right, let's do it. And
Any
we'll talk
final
about
words?
the stress test.
I got none. Stress
Good.
test next week. Take care.
See you later.